So Christmas dinner was always nice. No, it's not what you think. A big meal, often a turkey dinner with all the fixings, even a challah for good measure. Because my mom was a teacher, Christmas Day and the days leading up to it brought an excellent opportunity to spend all day in the kitchen cooking and baking. And because our family and most of our friends are Jewish, they had no place to be. So Christmas dinner became a thing at our house. It was festive in that people were joyful and relaxed, and despite it taking place on the 25th of December, felt much more like a Jewish holiday gathering than what I imagine a Christmas dinner would be like. It wasn't until much later that I switched to Chinese food and a movie tradition. I only recently learned some of the history why so many Jews eat Chinese food at Christmas time and throughout the year. A recent article written by Christian Fawcett called The Fascinating History Behind Why Jewish Families Eat Chinese Food on Christmas asks, why do so many Jews opt for chop suey? This article does an excellent job of giving us a deeper understanding of the topic, and so I'm going to share much of it with you as it's written tonight as we prepare for the Christmas holiday that so many of our friends and neighbors will be celebrating. For starters, many Jewish people eat Chinese food on Christmas because it's convenient. Chinese restaurants are open on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Many of them are anyway. And Chinese restaurants are often open on these days because historically, many Chinese families didn't keep a Christian calendar in their home. According to writer Joshua Eli Plout, the first documented instance of when we know as a Jewish Christmas happened dates back to 1935 New York Times article that mentioned a restaurant owner named Eng Shichak who brought lo mein to the Jewish children's home in Newark as an example of what Plout calls a Christmas mitzvah. Fawcett writes that Jews developed their love of all things steamed, stir-fried, and soy-sauced after leaving the old country. Between the mid-1800s and 1930s, waves of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, Germany, and Greece began settling in Manhattan's Lower East Side, a gritty, inexpensive neighborhood teeming with tenements, docks, and factories, and filled with synagogues and kosher butcher shops. While Jewish immigrants found community on the Lower East Side, author Sarah Lohman reminds us that there was a lot of discrimination against Jews at the turn of the century. They were often criticized, not only for not dressing like Americans and not speaking the language, but for also not converting to an American religion. Right next door to the burgeoning Jewish community on the Lower East Side was the city's nascent Chinatown. Many Chinese immigrants had initially come to the U.S. to work on the Transcontinental Railroad. After its completion in 1869, these laborers faced violence and discrimination in the western states. And so they came to New York City seeking new business opportunities, and some opened restaurants. By and large, Chinese restaurateurs didn't discriminate against Jewish customers. Joshua Eli Plout writes in his book, A Kosher Christmas, 'Tis the Season to be Jewish, that the Jewish and that the Chinese, as non-Christians, didn't perceive any difference between Anglo-Saxon New Yorkers and Jewish immigrants. They accepted all non-Chinese customers with open arms. They even advertised in the Jewish newspaper and offered messages of well wishes for the Jewish New Year each fall. Jewish customers embraced Chinese food in return. The restaurants were conveniently located and inexpensive, yet were also urbane in their eyes. Jews saw dining out as an American custom that they wanted to try, largely because they sought upward mobility among other Americans. According to Young Chen, a history professor and author of Chop Suey, a story of Chinese food in America, diners were attracted to Chinese food because, in their mind, it represented American cosmopolitanism and middle-class status. And they weren't deterred by the fact that the food in Chinese restaurants wasn't kosher, because they could easily pretend it was. Dairy was never a big part of a Chinese meal, so Jewish diners didn't have to worry about mixing meat and milk. And non-kosher ingredients like pork or seafood were often so finely chopped and drowned in sauces mixed with other ingredients like rice. These elements were well disguised enough that they could pass for more permissible forms of meat. You could kind of willfully ignore that there might be pork in them, said one author. It's like a vegetarian eating soup that has chicken stock. If you're a little flexible, you wouldn't even notice. Chinese food was exotic and new, filled with surprising flavors, ingredients, and textures. But for some Eastern European Jews, it also had familiar elements. Both Eastern European and Chinese cuisines shared an affinity for sweet and sour flavors and egg-baked dishes. Chinese restaurants had these pancakes, just like blintzes, and wontons resemble kreplach. The fact that the Chinese and Jews were America's two largest non-Christian immigrant populations brought them together. Unlike Italian restaurants, Chinese restaurants were open on Sundays and on Christian holidays. They also lacked religious imagery, which may have made them appear more welcoming to Jewish clients. Combined, these factors caused the number of Chinese restaurants in urban East Coast cities to skyrocket in the early 20th century. Jews soon accounted for what they say is 60% of the white clientele in New York City and Philadelphia's Chinese restaurants. And Chinese restaurants would often go out of their way to cater to these restaurant visitors. Yet, an unwavering affection for Chinese food wasn't shared by all Jewish people. In an example cited by Chen and Lee, reporter of the day, a Yiddish daily newspaper in New York City, they noted in 1928 that Jewish diners were in danger of drowning their culinary roots in soy sauce. And to take back their taste buds, Jewish Americans should hoist protest signs reading, "Down with chop suey, long live gefilte." But Jewish cookbooks had already begun including Americanized dishes like chop suey and egg foo young, which Chinese chefs had specially created to appeal to homegrown appetites. And as Lower East Side Jews moved into different neighborhoods, boroughs, and suburbs, Chinese restaurants followed them. By the mid-20th century, Nathan says Chinese restaurants had become so de facto social clubs in Jewish communities. Familiar faces were always present and children were always welcome. And eating with your hands was encouraged. Everyone left filled with food and gossip, whether it was Christmas or any other Sunday. And thanks to immigration patterns, nostalgia, and convenient hours of operation, this culinary custom has continued. We know that while it's not prescribed in Jewish texts that we do anything on Christmas, let alone eat our weight in baby corn and chestnuts, American Jews have a long history of breaking out the chopsticks in late December, while our Christian friends and neighbors are slicing into honey-glazed ham. And there's even a Yiddish term for this, oisessen, eating out, and it was coined in the Forward, a Jewish newspaper, in 1903 to describe the trend of Jews coming down from their tenement coops to enjoy the fine cooking of their Chinese neighbors on the Lower East Side. And so, in the spirit of tradition, and with the wisdom of our people's history of coming to this country and finding places to enjoy and gather, let us enjoy Chinese food this Christmas season, ever more thankful for the tremendous blessings and freedoms we enjoy all year long. Shabbat Shalom.